And lovely to be here in our home church of Maroubra Baptist Church. As Neil mentioned, we're worshipping with a Lutheran community in the Barossa Valley. It's 1,000 miles away, but I can tell you our hearts are here every Sunday. However, the Lord's people are everywhere, and we're very blessed to be included in their fellowship. Today I want to speak about violence and the Bible. Now, this is a very topical subject, and it's fraught. So I can tell you, I'll tell you now, I am out of my depth. But let's go. Right, see if this works. No. Well, as I said, we haven't it's not working on my thing. Okay, there we go. All right, here we go. That is working. So we start with one of my favourite films called The Witness from 1985, one of Harrison Ford's roles, and it concerns an Amish community in America. Now you may know of them. They've kept ancient practices and their Christian faith from the time of the Anabaptists, and they are pacifists, so they are against violence. But one of their children witnesses a murder while on a visit to New York and becomes a vital witness that has to be protected, hence the name Witness. And Harrison Ford is the police officer assigned to protect this boy before the court decides the facts of the matter. So he has to go and live with the Amish people for this purpose. So here he is with the grandfather, and here's the little boy. And one day he comes down to breakfast and comes across this scene. The grandfather has the boy on his knee, and they have found on the kitchen table an object of what to them is enormous horror. Someone has brought a gun into their home. A gun designed to kill people is here in our home. How will we ever live with this? So this sets the scene for the Bible's teaching on violence. Jesus, Sermon on the Mount. You've heard that it was said eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. This is the Jesus we sang to and dedicated ourselves to earlier in the service. I have decided to follow this Jesus. Where do we begin on violence in the world and in our community? This is a classic statement about violence, and it concerns a masterpiece by Pablo Picasso. On the 27th of April 1937, the Luftwaffe, in collusion with Franco's forces, undertook a bombing raid on a Spanish town during the Spanish Civil War, the town of Guernica. And they just dropped bombs on the town. And there were over 1,600 casualties. Picasso himself was in Paris at the time and was completely horrified at this, and he began his masterwork. He calls it Guernica. It was painted for the World Expo, and that's the size of it. It's in a kind of black and white and has these jarring images, Picasso-esque. It's because it's by Picasso. All the violence and hatred and dislocation of human life that comes with such acts of cruelty. Yeah. In 2002, I chose this image for our Christmas card. We'd been visiting Ukraine since 1998, teaching at the Kiev Christian University, where Ruth and I had been invited, and where we went year after year, and many things flowed from that. And so this was our expression, Christmas in Ukraine. And you can feel the simple peasant joy of these people, the Star of Bethlehem on the tree. That was then. This is now. So they're brutalist Soviet apartment blocks, routinely attacked and put to rubble. And in this poignant scene, we see in the rubble the Holy Family. Violence and the Bible. There's plenty of violence in the Bible. So the reading that Neil read speaks about this well-known scene where one of the disciples slices off a fellow's ear and Jesus rebukes him. You were trying to protect me, but don't draw your weapons at all, under any circumstances. You might be packing heat, but that's academic. Don't use these weapons. For all who live by the sword will die by the sword. And it's Luke who supplies, as a physician, some medical details. When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" One of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. Okay, that wasn't it. Luke wants to know which ear was it. And I'm glad when our surgeons say, was it the right leg or the left leg, Richard? Oh, let's make sure of it before you get all that equipment out. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. This is the only recorded surgical miracle in the New Testament. He touched the man's ear and healed him. So there's violence in the Bible. There was violence all around that holy night. And it started on page 2. Page 1, how wonderful. God saw everything that he made and it was very good. But on page 2, now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where's your brother Abel?" "I don't know." But am I my brother's keeper? Hey, don't try and pin this on me. I did it, but I'm going to try and get away with it. So violence enters the story at a very early age. And I hope this doesn't upset people because a lot of this is MA 15 plus or R rated. But just to illustrate, the Bible doesn't tiptoe around things. This is how it happened. Ehud, Book of Judges. Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's belly. I won't read the whole of that, it's so ugly. But another man is killed. Judges. Jael, who's a woman, went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid." This is the enemy general who was escaping. So he entered her tent and she put a covering over him. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. Now I think the milk, which would have been warm, was soporific. "This will put you to sleep," which it did. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. And I won't tell you what happened next because it's so ugly. Judges 15. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward Samson, one of the judges, shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, nothing like a stale jawbone, goodness me no. He grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. He killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass. And at his last, there's a depiction of that slaughter. And here he is on the last day of his life, engaged not only in suicide, but in killing all those who were in that theatre. So here's a litany, and I've just picked out any number, or a small number of representative examples. But this is the one most people would know from Sunday school. This is taught to children. And I can remember when I taught this to a primary school class in Borkham Hills, David and Goliath, there were parent complaints because of the violence of the story. What do you know? I learned it in Sunday school and nobody said this is violent. A boy kills a man, very big man. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David and Goliath. But there are consequences to this. Even for David, who we learn early in the story was a man after God's own heart. But that heart strayed to the wife of another man. He was a flawed character. And even in this tale, we find that this is not the ideal that God had in mind. Later, when David is king, he rises to address the people. King David rose to his feet and said, "Listen to me, my brothers and my people. I had it in my heart to build a house as a place of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, for the footstool of our God, and I made plans to build it. But God said to me, 'You are not to build a house for my name, because you are a warrior and have shed blood. So you can't perform the holiest function that a human being could perform, because you have blood on your hands.'" So this introduces the highest ideal for living in harmony with God. That is non-violence. There are a lot of ramifications to this. You've heard it was said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, tooth for tooth. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. Also, turn the other cheek. So this is what Jesus teaches. The son of David. This is what David could have been like and was meant to be like. The ideal man, Jesus. Non-violent. Don't have blood on your hands. And one of the most touching scenes of this past week was an interview with Ahmed, who was asked by the interviewer, "When you took the gun from that man, did you think you were going to kill him?" We've all seen this 100 times. He takes the gun, he holds it, he points it at the man, and then he puts it down and leans it against the tree. No, it didn't occur to me, because I would have had blood on my hands. I would have had blood on my hands. In this man's heart was the truth of what Jesus said. Not to have blood on your hands. He could avoid it. He did exactly the right thing. How wonderful that he did what he did. Apostle Paul picks this up. In art, Apostle Paul is routinely depicted with a sword. There's no mention anywhere ever that he was armed in any way. So this is symbolic. It's the sword of the Spirit, the Word of God, as Neil emphasised earlier. though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Cutting off the ear. All who live by the sword will die by the sword. And Jesus not only taught this, but he lived it. There before the governor, the Roman governor, who had an army at his disposal, Jesus stood as a man, vulnerable, unarmed. I could make this a real fight. I could call my father for 12 legions of angels. We'd win. But I haven't come to do that. I've come to show you how to live and how to die. Where are we? Oh, I'm pressing the wrong button all the time. Behold the man, Pilate said. And so Jesus exemplifies the power of peace. The pen is mightier than the sword. The knee is mightier than the fist. His followers, don't know what happened there. His followers, who have truly believed what he said, have from time to time risked their lives and given their lives to be like him. This is a case from Fox's Book of Martyrs. In a former era, this was Sunday afternoon reading for the devout Baptist family, Fox's Book of Martyrs. And it tells the story of an Anabaptist called Dirk Willems in Holland, who was being pursued by his church enemies. Religious hate is not a new thing. So he fled across a frozen dike, pursued by this man. The pursuer cracked the ice and fell into the icy water. He would have certainly died. Dirk Willems could look back and think, oh, beautiful, I'm out of here, man. And he's going to die. But he is a human being, made in the image of God. For him, Christ came to this earth to show love and to die for him. Can I turn my back on him? No. So, in obedience to what we've heard from the Sermon on the Mount and our Lord's example, he turned and rescued the man. Now, the story did not have a happy ending. Whilst Hollywood would say what great mates they were and they'd have a reunion on the same day. No, he was captured and executed. That's the price that sometimes is paid for living like Jesus. Somebody has to prove that Jesus was right, and this is the way to live and to die. Gandhi lived for non-violence. He met a violent death. And he followed the example of Jesus, we know that. And through his example, many lives were spared in the chaos of civil war that came to India with the partition. So we honour all people of peace, Ahmed, Mahatma Gandhi. And this man, when we travel in former Soviet countries, we realise that the word Baptist is a big negative, and religious hate just rises immediately. So we never use the word Baptist. So when people ask me, as once an imam asked in Tashkent, where we go regularly, he asked, well, you must be connected to a church. which church are you connected with? And I said, have you heard of Martin Luther King? Yes, he said, I have. I said, we're the same as him. Okay, let that sink in. Now, he could have looked it up and said, oh, he was a Baptist. I didn't realise that. What a terrible person. And Richard and Ruth are Baptists. If I'd known that, I'd have just let all my prejudices out against them. But no, we're like him. And we know what happened to him. The night before he was shot dead, he addressed the Garbagemen's Union, and he said, I have seen the promised land. I have seen the promised land. And the next day he was in the promised land. This is what he wrote: returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Now, we had a man in our congregation who's passed on and who served with the French Foreign Legion in Algeria in the 1950s. He was a wonderful Christian man. But his experience of the contact zone between French civilization and Islamic community was marked by violence. And he was a mercenary. So the French Foreign Legion consists of recruits, volunteers who are trained to kill. And they are universally feared in places where they come against you. And he said to us after one or two of our excursions into Muslim communities, he said, oh, I really admire you, Richard. Why is that, Henry? He said, because you go to Muslim communities without a gun. Without a gun. We're supposed to represent the King of Kings who created us like this in his image with a gun in case somebody looks the wrong way at me or menaces me in some way or tries to kidnap me or do something terrible. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but spiritual and mighty to the pulling down of strongholds. Now, I know people say, oh, don't you feel afraid when you go into these places? We know it's dangerous, but we are not afraid. All the things you could list, there's the police, the secret police, the Taliban, false brothers, just general pickpockets and criminals who only see our wallet. But Apostle Paul says in Philippians 1, show them you are not afraid. This is a sign to them of their destruction and of your salvation. Show them you are not afraid. So that's what we do. And that's why we don't carry a gun, because we're not afraid. And we often turn to this because we move in circles where religious hate and racism, race hate, is just ingrained into everybody's DNA. And we just pop up like lambs among wolves. And it's disarming. They might have fed on hate, but they don't know quite what to do with us when we appear before them so vulnerable. And we can succumb to religious hate wherever we are, and race hate. And I think of this little poem. He called me heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. He drew a circle to keep me out. That's racism and religious prejudice against me. He drew a circle to keep me out. But God and I had the will to win. We drew a circle to keep him in. And we've been drawing bigger circles all the time, everywhere we go, and in Australia, and in the Barossa Valley. You draw a bigger circle. They draw a small circle to keep you out. We draw a bigger circle to keep them in, because they are God's children. They, whoever they are. Though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. We heard this story years ago about a Protestant community in southern France during the war. It's a town called Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. And there, the pastors of this church accepted Jewish children, refugee children, into homes and placed them. They had social workers to place Jewish children who were on the run towards the safety of Switzerland. And they took in hundreds of Jewish children. There were Gestapo officers in the town. This happened under their noses. And they risked their lives every day for protecting Jewish children. That's been made into a film, The Hill of 1,000 Children. You may have seen it. And Ruth and I have been there and we've worshipped in this temple. A good place to hide, the story says. And it was a good place to hide. And many children were saved. And this place is a pivotal site for the history of violence. You've seen Russell Crowe's film. Fantastic film. Because all that blood is tomato sauce. It's just a film. But it wasn't at the time. So here in the Colosseum in Rome, there were games, and the old saying was to keep the people under, give them bread and circuses. And the circuses consisted of the most brutal games that involved gladiatorial fights and fights with animals where someone would die. Like bullfighting, somebody's going to die. Or the bull will die or the toreador will die. One day, in 391 AD, a simple monk came in from the country and went with the crowds to the games, so-called, and he witnessed gladiators fighting to the death. His name was Telemachus. And in his simplicity of faith, he went down into the ring to separate these men. Stop fighting. Stop killing each other. And they hacked him to death. And the emperor was watching. Honorius was his name. And his statue, the Roman Emperor Honorius, the coin bearing his visage, and he was so incensed by this wickedness of violence against an innocent man. It wasn't sport. He hadn't signed up for this. That he banned gladiatorial combat from then on. Thank you, Telemachus, for standing up against violence. The power of peace. The pen is mightier than the sword. It might take longer. Gandhi was asked whether his tactics would have worked in Nazi Germany. He said, oh yes, they would have, except a lot more people would have died. The knee is mightier than the fist. These are the weapons of our warfare. All who live by the sword will die by the sword. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons, children of God. And we are here in the shadow of this symbol that adorns millions of buildings around the world. A symbol of the most vile violence against humanity. And I show you these photographs of First Nations believers at Yuendamu in Central Australia. They prepared a corroboree for Easter to depict what happened at Easter time. And my friend and colleague Ivan Jordan was a Christian worker amongst them at the time, and he writes about it, and he's told us about it in person, that it was so powerful, so moving. Afterwards, he gathered the people who participated in this and said, oh, we must take this to the other mob over there and do it for them. They looked at him stunned. They said, we can't do this again. Why not? It was terrific. They said, we cannot kill God again. And this is what this 2 pieces of wood tells us. We cannot kill God again. Our forebears killed him, and he came back from the dead. And we rejoice in his triumph over death. And we remember, as we come to this table, the things that led to his death. And the night before he was died, he took bread, and when he broke it, he said, take, eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me.